Yes, so here we go. So I'd like to introduce you to today's presenter, Kai-Han Krippendorf. Kai-Han is the founder of OutThinker, a former McKinsey consultant and author of 4 business strategy books. And the content on today's discussion will actually be based on his new book. This will be released in early 2019, so everyone kind of gets a sneak peek into that. And he is focused on business growth strategy and innovation, helping growing cadre of leading companies and corporations prepare themselves to compete in a more digital, agile, and purpose-driven future. Kai-Han has spent more than a decade studying the intersection of language, technology, and innovation to drive competitive advantage. We've partnered with him for the last 5 years and done several workshops together, and I know that there's a lot for us to cover today, so we are very happy to have you here today, Kai-Han.
Thanks. Thank you for having me, and thank you, everyone, for attending. So I'll just jump in. I'm going to talk today about the idea of internal innovation and what it takes to enable employees to innovate. And I got interested in this about 3 years ago. I have run a number of innovation workshops. That's kind of like primarily what I do, and with GP, both within GP and for clients. And we'll talk more about those in a little while. But often what happens, as you can imagine, is you'll get a group of people together and they'll come up with a very different disruptive idea. But often, once you try to take those ideas into the organization, they hit some kind of bureaucracy. And that tends to kill off the really innovative ideas. And there's a lot of agreement for the idea that really it is the entrepreneur who is free from the shackles of systems and processes and dogma and history that are the ones that really innovate. And here you see a few quotes from some well-known, respected, smart, capable experts. Clayton Christensen, author of The Innovator's Dilemma, he talks about that the processes that enable large companies to become large are exactly those that reject disruptive technologies. And if we go down to the bottom, John Hagel, he talks about these corporate antibodies that tend to emerge around innovative ideas. There is this idea that the person that is the innovator looks something like this. And if we look at these people, and I could throw up some other pictures, people over here as well, they kind of follow this narrative about being in college, having an idea, starting to work on it. Maybe you leave college, you go to the West Coast with this big idea, and you go into a garage and you develop this idea. It looks something like this. Someone with a big idea goes into a garage, you got a hipper, a hackster, a hustler, they build this thing, then they build a company and they launch this idea and disrupt the market, if you will. Now, I, as an entrepreneur, I love this story, and many of us love to tell these stories, but we wanted to see, is this really true? Because a couple clients suddenly started taking the ideas out of our workshops and actually turning them into value. And we thought, is that the norm or is that unusual? So we looked at the 30 most transformative innovations over the last 30 years. And this is based off of a study of a panel of Wharton professors who reviewed about over 1,000 submissions, and they came up with their list of the 30 most transformative innovations. These are things like biofuels, like e-commerce, the internet, DNA sequencing, ATMs, kind of the big things that have really impacted. And we asked, who conceived of the idea? Who then developed the idea and made it work, and then who scaled the idea. The color coding is a little hard to see here, but the blue represents the entrepreneur. And so what you'll see is that only 8 of these big innovations were actually conceived of by entrepreneurs. 22 of them were conceived of by employees. If we did not have, or we did not enable employees to innovate, we would not have AIDS treatments or stents or email. We would not have PCs or microprocessors or very sophisticated fiber optics. We owe much of the modern world to the employee innovator. Now then, after the employee innovator conceives of the idea, who develops the idea? You'll see here the blue represents entrepreneurs. They develop about 7 of these ideas. And then you'll see the competition step in green, and in the red and the orange, this is the original innovator, as well as academia and institutions. They step in, especially when these innovations have important social value. And then who scales the idea and takes it to market? If you look at the big green swath there, it really is the competition. So if we want to say what is the true path of innovation, what we would have to say is that it is an employee that comes up with the idea. Some combination of the employee and someone within academia and institutions develops the idea. Then the competition gets enthralled by it, takes it over, and they scale it. So that's the truth. It's just not as compelling a story to tell as that hero journey story of the entrepreneur. But there are reasons to believe that established organizations, although we know it can be difficult, actually are able to innovate differently and in some ways better than small ones. When you're a small company, you're a startup, you're a disruptor, you're risk-taking. And then once you start seeking scale, you start to introduce bureaucracy, you narrow tasks, you tightly monitor the performance of those tasks, you become more risk-averse because you've got a formula that works, which makes sense, and then the level of internal innovation tends to drop. But if you can push through and scale further, then you have 4 things that enable you to innovate more effectively than a startup. You've got scale that startups don't have. You have multiple capabilities under one roof. You have innovation resources, money to invest in innovation. You have the ability to diversify risks. So there are a lot of reasons to say that it actually can be, if we can figure it out, more effective to innovate from within a large organization. This is Kamal Kadir. He was an engineer trained at MIT. He's from Bangladesh, where my mother's from, and I got to meet him a couple years ago. And I'll give you the short story here. He came up with the idea that he was going to launch a mobile P2P payment system in Bangladesh. And as an entrepreneur, you might expect him to start this company, as a startup, as a scrappy startup. But instead, he realized that the best path to scaling this innovation was to do it within an established bank. So he partnered with the bank, the largest NGO in Bangladesh. He launched Bcash, and only 5 years in, there are over 35 million fishermen, farmers, and small business owners on their platform. It is, if you can get it right, advantageous to innovate from within. And if we look at the stories of great innovative companies, what you'll find is it's not that the entrepreneur's original idea was the big idea. It's rather that the entrepreneur created an ecosystem, a culture, structures, an organization that allowed people that followed employees to introduce innovations. IKEA disrupted the furniture industry by introducing the flat pack box. That flat pack box wasn't introduced until 10 years after the company's founding, when an employee wasn't able to get a table in the back of a car, and so he took the chairs off, folded it, and that is the innovation. 10 years after the company was started. It's rarely the first idea. It's not Apple's Mac computer that really drives its value. It's the iPod, the iPhone, the iPad, Amazon. It's not from selling books online. It's all of these innovations that were introduced not by Jeff Bezos, but by employees within Amazon who push for innovative ideas. And so it's possible, and it's also valuable. This is pulled from research in entrepreneurial intensity. We're calling it here internal innovativeness. And what it kind of says is that if you looked at your organization, you could say, how frequently do people inside my company pursue innovative ideas? And what is the degree of those innovative ideas? How innovative are they? How much risk do they involve? How proactive are they? And if you do that, you end up with 9 different types of people, of profiles of companies, if you will. Bottom left, you've got the business model operators like Walmart that are just continually perfecting the business model. At the top right, you have these revolutionary companies like Amazon that are continually introducing not only new products, but new business models and categories. Bottom right, we put Ford as a sporadic innovator. They kind of run their model for 10 years, and then everything changes and they reinvent themselves. So right now they're reinventing themselves as a mobility company. You have someone like BMW, which every year accumulates new innovations and incorporates it into its core product. So it's hard to catch up with them because they've accumulated years and years of innovations, but they're not introducing entirely new categories. And then in the MasterCard in the middle kind of represents the dynamic innovator. And so it would be interesting for you to look at where do you think your organization sits on this grid, and what would be the payoff of potentially moving outward? We're not saying that everyone needs to be a revolutionary company, but if you can be more innovative than your peers, your competitors, you'll be more valuable. And this is a measure of total return to shareholder, which is you could equate to your stock price. And so if you were a business model operator today and your stock price was 100, if you could just move one step to the right, your stock price could be 137. Or one step up towards incremental, you could be 140. So there really is a valuable payoff at enabling internal innovation. So if we know it's possible and we know it's valuable, well, why doesn't it happen very often? So we spent the last 3 years interviewing about 150 internal innovators, asking them to share what do you see as the barriers to internal innovation. These are just a few quotes, and I'll leave this up as I ask the next question, which is if you think about your attempts to introduce innovations inside your company or the employees in your company, in your organization, when their attempts are flustered, what is it that stops them? What are the barriers that you've seen to internal innovation? We'd love to ask you to type these into the chat area in your WebEx interface and share with us what are the barriers that you have seen. And I can't read them.
Yep, so go ahead, folks, go ahead and enter those barriers. Then we've got a lot coming in: budget, lack of motivation, even more coming in. Here we go. Fear of change. Belief that it won't work.
Yes.
Regulatory issues, senior management.
Yeah.
Let's see. Doesn't fit with short-term priorities. Lack of leadership support.
Yes.
Unwillingness to change, not in their interest. No resources, no plan, not in the plan. Political dynamics, no incentives, favoritism, technical infrastructure. Initial spark, but lack of consistent support. Aversion to risk.
Yes.
More around leadership support. Issues with time and resources. I like this one. If it ain't broke, don't fix it thinking.
Great. Okay. This is perfect. Yeah. What you're experiencing is what everyone that we interviewed described. You're kind of right on. I don't hear anything that is unprecedented. It's frustrating, I know, but you're not alone, is my point. So we took these 150 interviews and we categorized the barriers that were laid out, and we put them into buckets. We came with 7 buckets, and we put them into a sequence that kind of describes a story, and of course we gave it an acronym, innovate, to hopefully make it easy for people to remember. And I'm just going to poke around these a little bit. Many of the barriers that I hear being shared fall into the environment bucket, which is the last one. And so I think I'll move more quickly through the other ones, and we will spend more time, therefore, on the environment. But just to lay these out, intent is really, do people have an intention, a motivation to try something new? And many don't because they've been told no too many times. The next is need, is do they understand what the company and customer and market needs? And many of us don't, because strategies aren't communicated clearly to us. Are we able to generate very disruptive new options? That's the third barrier. Then there are these value blockers. Think of these as conflicts with your business model. Then there's the fact that under ACT, which is that in order to drive these introduce these innovations, you usually have to take action in order to prove that the idea will work. But your company is geared to asking you to prove it before they let you take action. And then there is the challenge of pulling together the right kind of team, which requires you to collaborate across silos, which is difficult to do. And then there are a bunch of things in the environmental factors. Again, I think I'm going to kind of move quickly to get to the environmental factors, because most of what you shared, what I heard, fits within that. Your leadership, your ability to get resources, your cultural aversion to risk, the short-termedness of your investors. So I'm going to move a little quickly through the beginning so that we can talk more about environment. So let's talk a little bit about intent. Kat Cole, she is the CEO of Fortune Brands. Fortune Brands owns Cinnabon and a whole number of other companies that are not at the tip of my tongue right now. She was the CEO of Cinnabons. She started her career as a waitress at a Hooters, and she describes really early in her career, her mom was a stay-at-home mom, didn't have enough income to support her family, so Kat had to get a job, and she described that there was a strike when the workers in the kitchen didn't show up one day, and she said, you saw the divide immediately. Half of the waiters left the restaurant because there was no food to serve. Half of the waiters went into the kitchen to cook. So there is this intent of when you see a problem or opportunity, which action do you take? And there is a few places to look for it to understand what drives this intent challenge. One area is entrepreneurial intention. And it basically says that in order to take action, you must first have the intention to take that action. And when people have that intention and don't take the action, it's usually because of one of three different conversations. Either they're saying, what outcome would this behavior produce? Would this really work if I were to do it? Another thing that they might be saying is, what would other people say? Is this acceptable behavior? Will I be laughed at or will I be rewarded? And am I capable? Self-efficacy. Can I do it, even if someone could do it? And so it's helpful to look inside and ask, when you see that people are not taking action, are not going into the kitchen, which one of these three is it that's stopping them? Next thing is need. Now, need simply speaks to the fact that most people don't know what your strategy is. Only 55% of middle managers surveyed can name even one of their company's top 5 priorities. Now, when we look at these internal innovators, what we see is they understand what the company needs, and sometimes they understand that even better than the company does. Consider Chuck House. He was working at HP. This is 50, 60 years ago. He's working at HP, and he's working on a project in the R&D lab. Mr. Hewlett comes to visit the R&D lab, which he does every year, and he sees what Chuck is working on, and that the market projection was that this product would at most have a market of 50 units a year, and he tells Chuck, I don't want to see this project in the R&D lab when I come back next year. And what did he mean was that I want you to kill off the project. But what did Chuck interpret that to mean is, well, he wants me to take it to market within a year. So on his time off during Christmas, he got a couple demos, he flew around and showed them to customers, and he came back after the holidays with orders, thereby getting this product out of the R&D lab and into the market. It's because of that choice that we saw a man land on the moon. It was this device that enabled us to actually see Neil Armstrong land as opposed to only hear him. And he was awarded this Medal of Defiance Defiance by HP eventually, awarded in recognition of extraordinary contempt and defiance beyond the normal call of engineering duty. So my point is that the next challenge is that people don't understand what the company actually needs. And when they do, they will pursue opportunities even when the boss says, hey, we don't need that. Next thing is options, and you'll see this ideas framework here. This pulls on the core workshop that we've licensed to GP and that we run for clients throughout the world with GP, and basically says that if you just get stuck on one idea, if it's the wrong idea, you're likely not going to want to abandon it for a better idea. So you need a lot of ideas, as Edison said. To have a good idea, you must first get a lot of ideas. We've run this workshop for Microsoft over the last 10 years or so. We think that we've, through those, helped generate over 40,000 growth ideas, and still very few of them actually make their way into the strategy. So the pipeline of ideas is just enormous. You want to be generating lots and lots and lots of ideas, and so they have a portfolio of ideas that you're choosing between. And so how do you generate ideas? Well, it has to do with how people see options. This is Alexandra Kostanuk. She's the reigning women's world chess champion, and she'll do as a marketing stunt, she'll line up a whole town to play chess, and she will just immediately see the winning move every time. And the reason that she can see these as many options is simply that she applies patterns. And so this ability to generate disruptive ideas comes not from logic or intelligence as much as it comes from the number of patterns and the way that you use those patterns when you're problem solving. Excuse me. So a great framework. And if you want more on this framework, we could send you some background. You can also take a look at my book, was earlier mentioned, Outthink the Competition, which lays out this framework. But it's really about managing the conversations in the hallways that lead to disruptive ideas and making sure that you don't shortcut the exploration of possible strategies. Imagining a future, dissecting the problem, expanding by generating lots of options, analyzing and choosing the really disruptive ones, and then thinking about how you're going to sell it internally to build buy-in and support. And so we call this the ideas framework. So next you've kind of generated a bunch of ideas and narrowed them down. You've come up with an idea. Now if that idea really is disruptive, it's going to be different than what's already out there. And so you start to run into these value blockers. And sometimes it's that your clients won't adopt the idea. Think about McPizza. They have this problem that they were able to, they figured out that, lo and behold, almost everyone that goes to McDonald's also eats pizza. And you can actually bake pizza inside a McDonald's store. So they launched McPizza. You probably have not heard of McPizza because it was a complete flop. And the reason it was a flop was just because the brand association that people have with McDonald's is with hamburgers, and customers couldn't get their heads around the idea that you could also buy pizza from McDonald's. These are these little blocks, value blockers we call them, that stop your idea from achieving its full success. Frito-Lay, the division of Pepsi, they launched Grandma's Cookies. All the market projections were that this was going to be a much bigger hit than it actually was. And the primary reason that it wasn't as successful as they hoped it would be was, even though they had the perfect cookie and the perfect name and the marketing, they didn't think about the fact that drivers for Frito-Lay were used to going to the aisle in the grocery store where the chips are, the snacks are, and they need to go there every week and restock and clean them up, but they weren't accustomed to going two aisles away to the cookie aisle. And so it was for that reason that this turned out not to be successful. And so what's really helpful to do is to step back, and we think that there are 8 different places to look at, and we actually have a a diagnostic that if you want we can send you, in which you think through these 8 different areas of your current business model and see where are the value blockers going to come from. It's just like, doing a checklist. As if you were building a house, you're going to check a bunch of things to see where you might have issues. And so, as I said, if you want, we can send you a diagnostic to do that. Now, let's say that you have gone through those value blockers. In other words, you or your people have thought through the current business model, identified where those value blockers will be, and then adjusted the idea in order to avoid or preempt those value blockers. The next challenge, which comes up often, and I think many people alluded to it when we asked what the barriers you see, is that innovation is innately risky. Because when you're doing something new, you cannot substantiate ahead of time whether it will work and whether there's a market for it. So you've got to take a risk. As Jeff Bezos says, given a 10% chance of 100 times payoff, you should take that bet every time. But you're still going to be wrong 9 times out of 10. So you think about that. He knows that 9 out of 10 experiments are going to fail, but that one experiment that succeeds is going to give him 100 times payoff. So by making 10 bets, he's guaranteed a 10 times payoff. And the way to get access to this is to look at it this way, is that when you're driving innovation, you need to adapt, or usually need to adapt, an act, learn, build model. So you take action, you put something out in the market, you see how people will react, you learn from that, and then you adjust, and then you build based off of that learning, whereas most established organizations are geared to follow a PPE approach. Predict what the market will be, or what the issues will be, or the execution plan will be. Develop a plan, approve it, and then execute. It is fundamentally different than the act, learn, build approach, but it's not completely foreign to established organizations. When Lee Iacocca was the CEO of Chrysler, his marketing team came to him with an idea of introducing a convertible Sebring, and they were going to invest $1 million in doing a marketing study. And he said, well, before we invest that $1 million, why don't you just take a Sebring, cut the roof off, drive it around, and see what people think. It's this type of thinking, taking action in order to learn. Or when Apple was building the mouse, sorry about that. When Apple was building the mouse, they were going to build it with a trackball. The mouse that the mouse technology that they took from Xerox used laser technology, so it was too expensive for a consumer product. And so they thought, why don't we use a trackball? But they didn't want to invest money in building a trackball unless they knew people would like it. So what did they do? They went across the street to the pharmacy, and they bought one of those roll-on deodorant sticks and used the ball to create a box and see how people reacted to it. Or when Zappos was first launched, they didn't want to spend money on inventory. So how can you test whether there is a market for a online shoe store without buying shoes? Well, you put up pictures of shoes on your website, and when someone buys, you go across the street to the Nordstroms and buy the shoes. Now, you don't make margin off of that, but you are learning whether there is a market. In other words, there are clever ways to increase ROI, not by increasing R, but by reducing I, bringing down the cost of experimentation radically. As Michael Schrage says, I'm sorry, put this back up, ROI, bring down I. Michael Schrage, he is the author of Innovators Hypothesis. Highly recommend this book. He has this framework of 5-5-5. Give 5 people $5,000 in 5 weeks to run an experiment, and then see what you can learn from that. So it sounds easy, but it is actually quite a shift in paradigm. All right, so let's say that you've figured out your value blockers and you've figured out your experiment. You now need a team that's going to run the experiment. And here we hit another major blockage for established organizations, which is we need to start moving in at a faster pace. The pace of change is accelerating. We probably all feel this, and yet our established organizations are still run like centrally planned economies, where you have an authority who looks at markets and decides how they're going to allocate people, resources, jobs, brands, capabilities, right? And we know that central planning doesn't work in the economy, but we expect it to work inside established corporations. And as this pace of change around us accelerates, the traditional hierarchy structure is starting to give in. If the rate of change on the outside exceeds the rate of change on the inside, then the end is near. Bill Drayton, a founder of Ashoka, said the same thing. He says, as the rate of change escalates exponentially, the old ways of organizing and educating, which were designed for efficiency and repetition, are dying. And that's why we see, and these are a few examples, organizations exploring new models for organizing themselves. The team of teams approach explored by the U.S. Army, Zappos and other companies adopting holacracy, Red Hat, the open organization. ING has taken big swaths of its organization, and instead of making it a hierarchy, they make these squads of 6 people, and then when you have 4 squads, that performs a tribe, and they have this whole system. But the point is that you move and you adopt a model that allows small, agile teams to combine and configure rapidly. And on the left-hand side, we see 5 examples of models that are emerging to try to introduce this new organizational model. You may be familiar with some of them. OKRs, which is introduced by Google. John Cotter, he introduced a new model called Accelerate. 4DX is the Stephen Covey group. Growth teams, Scrum teams. But if we look at them, they all share certain principles in common. And they really are all about getting teams, cross-functional teams together to pursue one goal and one metric, move at a rapid rhythm, and seek quick wins. So that is the challenge in team. And so I'll spend the last 7 minutes before we go to Q&A talking about environment. And environment is, I was surprised, really, at how much is actually known about what the barriers are, the environmental or organizational barriers are to internal innovation. So we looked at every report that we could find that showed a statistically significant correlation between some organizational driver and the level of internal innovation. And then we grouped it together into 4 different macro drivers, if you will. So you've got your talent, who your people are. You've got the structures that they work under. You have the leadership that leads them, and you have the culture. And we put these all together because you need to have all 4 in place. Even if you recruit a lot of talent that is good at driving innovation from within, if you stick them in a culture that does not allow them the freedom to pursue their talents, they're eventually going to stop innovating. Even if you gave them the great culture, but leadership wasn't prioritizing them, then they'll fail. If you put them under organizational structures that hinder their ability to innovate, they'll still fail. So you really need to do all 4. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about each of these. You, or many of you, conducted a questionnaire, and I have the results of that, which will feed back to you on rating your organization across all of these. But I think that you'll notice that many of the barriers that you cited are represented here. So let's talk about structure. There are really 4 structural barriers that are statistically correlated with lower levels of internal innovation. As many of you said, innovation resources, the ability to get funding or to get time to work on innovation, and that is linked to the short-termedness of resource allocation decisions. Rewards are reward incentive systems, and whether they encourage innovative behavior, that includes both financial, but more importantly, non-financial rewards, like a recognition. Do your structures allow for risk-taking? If you try something and fail, do you get a demotion or a promotion? And organizational freedom, the ability to pull together a team across silos, the ability to say, there is a project that's not within my reporting structure, and I'd like to work on that, and your boss says, go ahead, go work on that. These are 4 things that you want to make sure you have in place. Let's go now to talent. So talent is the attributes of people who are shown to be effective at intrapreneurship, not entrepreneurship. 3 of these make them look like entrepreneurs. So they tend to be innovative thinkers. They take autonomous action, so like they take action before asking for permission. Think about Chuck House. And they have strong market or competitive awareness. They know what's going on in the market, what customers need, what the competition is doing. Those 3 might make them look like entrepreneurs, but there are 3 ways in which internal innovators differ from external innovators, from entrepreneurs, which is why I think many entrepreneurs, they might build a company, their company is acquired, but then they have difficulty working within the established company that acquired them, because the successful internal innovators tend not to be risk takers. They tend to take calculated risk. They look to create risk asymmetry. They're not betting their money, they're betting their company's money, and so they look to bet a little to gain a lot. The next is they're not going to get rich from innovating. They're not doing it for $1 billion. But rather they have the intrinsic motivation to innovate. And this is one thing I love about internal innovators is that you rarely even know who they are. They're like, they're not running a race and they don't get to finish the finish line. It's more like they're passing the baton. And so it's hard to find them because as you follow the paths of internal innovations, the person who is actually behind it is not often recognized as that person, but they got intrinsic value from knowing that they were behind that innovation. And the 6th one, which for me jumps out as in hindsight obvious, but not at the beginning, is political acumen, that they actually love politics and they're good at understanding and managing internal politics. And now the other 2, they correlate quite directly with the others. So culture, you'll see that these cultural attributes correlate with talent. So cultures that encourage innovative thinking, encourage autonomy and proactivity, encourage market and competitive awareness, encourage people to know who the customer is, for example, and who allow for risk-taking, but this calculated kind of risk-taking. And leadership really, many people say it starts with leadership, and I would say it's easier if it starts with leadership, but it doesn't have to start with leadership. But you want leadership that prioritizes innovation, who says innovation is important, and then who does the right things across talent, structure, and culture. They build innovative talent. They create structures that allow for innovative behavior, and they shape cultural norms that encourage innovation. And so those are the environmental factors, and if we put it all together, just kind of my closing remark, and then we'll get to questions, and if you'd like to, we can look at some of the survey results. If we look at these, I think that we lay them out. We are at a historic moment for and nonprofit organizational evolution, in which established companies are recognizing that there is a need for them to and the possibility to enable internal innovation. And if we look at the emerging organizational concepts and where they fit, you'll see that they are addressing the key barriers to internal innovation. Employees are going to become intrapreneurs. To communicate need, instead of having complex strategic plans, we're starting to see simple purpose statements that everyone can understand and align to. Ideas are no longer going to come from boardrooms, but from hallways. We're going to go from one business model to multiple business models, ecosystems of business models. If you think about Microsoft, for example, they have a licensed business model, they've got a platform business model, they have multiple business models that exist together, which helps remove these value blockers. We're going to move from a mindset of prove it to do it in order and go to a mindset which is we're after learning. We're going to take action in order to learn, so move from prove to learn. We're going to move from structures that look like divisions to structures that look like agile teams. And we're going to move from an organizational principle, moving away from the centralized economic model towards an open platform in which ideas compete for ideas and people have the freedom to pursue opportunities. And for me, at least, that is, that's an exciting future. So I know that was a lot of material, and I laid it out so that we can decide where you'd like to dig in deeper. So if you have questions or comments, we'd love to hear them.
Yes, thank you, Kai-Han, for that great discussion. I know that 42 minutes goes by fast, and we've got about 15 minutes or so left in this session for Q&A, and there have actually been several questions that came in. I do encourage those of you that if you have a question or if there's an area that you would like for us to dig into a little bit deeper, and we do have time, be sure to enter that into the Q&A module at this time. That can be found in the lower right-hand panel of WebEx. He covered a lot in the last 45 minutes, and there's still a lot more to discuss. So if you don't mind going to the last slide, I'd like to share with everyone your contact information so that they can keep in touch with you and continue the conversation beyond today. And we'll be sending everybody a link to a follow-up blog post where we'll be addressing some of today's key takeaways. I'd also like to remind everyone on the call that the recording and slides from today, as well as some additional resources, will be sent to the email address that you provided. So with that, a few questions have come in, so we'll go ahead and get started with those. This is actually a good one. I know you maybe gave some examples earlier, but are there any companies that do this well?
I think that there are. One that's not so well known, but there's actually quite a bit written about, is Huawei, the Chinese appliance maker, and they have conceived of their organization really as 1,000 CEOs, 1,000 different companies, and they allow companies to compete with each other. They look at motivating or incentivizing managers by direct customer feedback. So I think that is an example of a company that does well. I think Microsoft has made a good shift towards unlocking this from where they've come. Certainly Amazon does in its own particular way, but there are examples.
And this next one is, going back to leaders, should leaders be innovative, or should they be providing structure, talent, and culture so that others can be innovative?
Yeah, I like where this question is coming from. I think they should be providing structure and culture and encouraging talent. It's a little bit sort of related to the Jim Collins concept of being a clock builder rather than a time teller. And it's also related to my argument earlier, which is it wasn't the original IKEA founder's idea that made IKEA great. It wasn't the Mac that made Apple valuable. It wasn't selling books that made Amazon what it is. It's really those leaders' ability not to impose their brilliant innovations on everyone else, but really build the structures, talent, and culture that allow other people to innovate.
The next question is actually one that I hear a lot, especially, because innovation is such a large part of organizational discussion right now. Do you have any advice for our attendees around how to introduce innovation into an organization and how to explain its benefits? I know oftentimes there's a little bit of a poor understanding about what innovation is. Yes.
Yeah, it's great. I think that, you can ask 10 innovation experts what innovation is, and there'll be like 10 different meanings. It's, the word has adopted lots of different meanings. And sometimes it's helpful to call it innovation, and sometimes it's better not to call it innovation because innovation has negative and positive entailments depending on which organization you're in. I think it's helpful to look at these 4 things and think of them as kind of a compass. And I can't prove this, but anecdotally it seems to me that the successful internal innovators are able to find these islands of freedom in the organization where the leadership of that area of the organization builds prioritizes and, encourages innovation, where the structures are a little bit different, the subculture allows more risk-taking, and innovation talent pool and are attracted to. So I think that is a good way to think about where to place your innovation. Also, there are several tricks, I think, in figuring out how to frame your innovation, kind of like, as you would market an idea in the market, think about how to market an idea inside the company to understand what the needs are. Like, for example, one of our clients with GP was Red Bull. We did a project for them, and the client had this idea that really had a lot of long-term potential value, could lead to kind of a new business model, but he knew that the company wasn't really going to get excited about something that may have a payoff 10 years from now. So what he did was he framed it really as a protective strategy to shield the brand for some risk. So figuring out how to kind of sell it forward is what I call it. And then also think about which parts of the organization really need it. There's one guy, he was one of the people that most advanced solar energy, but he introduced a leap in the efficiency of solar panels. But his employer was Exxon, and Exxon, isn't really kind of bullish on solar. But he was able to convince Exxon to adopt his technology because he found that the oil platforms that Exxon operated sit in the ocean, and they have a major energy problem that they don't have electricity to run sometimes. So he was able to convince them to adopt his solar panels. So it's like, creatively finding these islands of freedom where you're going to find resonance for your innovation, and then framing it in a way that meets the needs of the organization.
Great. And so assuming that, an organization has a team of teams culture, how helpful is competition? Would you envision competition enabling and encouraging teams or discouraging them, assuming that, failure is common?
Yeah, I think the examples I've seen, competition encourages. If, that's partnered with kind of this value of the allowance of risk-taking, so that, if your team loses, it doesn't hurt your career, or it doesn't hurt your prospects. Huawei, for example, very explicitly encourages multiple teams to be working on the same project. PPL, if I'm saying that right, let me think about I'm not remembering the company's name off the top of my head. Pittsburgh, PPG, I think it is. Pittsburgh Plate Glass originally. But they're a real innovator in materials, and they have hundreds of innovation centers around the world, and they explicitly encourage their innovation centers to compete with each other. They'll send out a challenge, and they'll have for 3 days each innovation lab working on the same challenge to see who comes up with the best idea. So I think competition helps. As long as you frame it, as healthy competition.
So the next person's question is, they do a lot of work developing and coaching leaders. From your perspective, what is the one most important message that they should be sharing with leaders to help them be open to and to promote innovation from within?
I think that's a tough one. I think that depending on the leader, there's always something missing, But, what I'm seeing a lot of is this: I want innovation, but first I need to take care of the things that are wrong in the company, or, I need to take care of the basics. And it's a little bit like, you have a to-do list, and you try to get all the easy stuff off of your to-do list before you get to the big stuff on your to-do list, so you never get to the big stuff on your to-do list. That you need to be doing both. You need to be dealing with the immediate tactical things that are wrong with your company, the urgent things, but you need to have in your portfolio some innovations that are have a potential to have a major payoff. Going back to Jeff Bezos, if you have a 1 in 10 chance, you're going to have 100 times payoff. You're going to win if you do 10. So I think it's leaders asking for innovation and then being too scared to embrace innovation because they think they have to deal with the tactical, and getting them to shift their view to we need to do both.
We have a few more questions that came in. If you do have a question, keep them coming in. We'll go ahead and take a few more. If we do hit the top of the hour, or the end of the hour, then what we'll do is any other questions that we don't get to, we'll make sure that we'll address those in the blog post. But the next question is, actually, do you mind going back to that value blocker slide again? Someone was interested in kind of diving into that one a little bit more.
The diamonds, right?
Yes.
Yep. Yeah. You're asking me to just dive into it?
Yeah. If you want to just go into that one a little bit more, or they might just want to have seen it again just for a little bit. But I think that one would be a good one to dive into. Yep.
My next book after this is just going to be a book about this framework, which I kind of like pulled together over several years of teaching a class. And I don't think it's the truth, but it's a really helpful framework. So basically, it says that there are these 8 different potential areas of conflict. Positioning is about your brand and who your core customer is. And think about the McDonald's brand and that it didn't work for pizza. So, what does your brand allow? Pricing is your pricing structures. Adobe had to shift from selling licenses to selling software as a service. It was a painful adjustment. Sometimes new innovations require a pricing structure that's inconsistent with the existing pricing structure. A big one is processes. To deliver on your new innovation, there are internal processes that are going to need to change, or that your current internal processes don't allow you to deliver on the innovation. Promotion is a huge one. It's about marketing and sales. And sales forces, especially in a B2B environment, are repeated often as a primary blocker to innovations because your sales force might be motivated to sell the old thing and not the new thing. They understand the old thing, not the new thing, right? They can make more money selling the old thing and not the new thing. And so you really got to think through how you incentivize and train salespeople in order to promote the innovation effectively. The product is, the core product attributes and what your innovation would deliver. And there you want to make sure that it's not, if you can, not cannibalize a current product. If you're currently cannibalizing a product, then it's going to be harder to get adoption for it. So how can you shape it so it's augmenting your current products and not challenging them? Placement is distribution. Let's go back to Grandma's cookies, right? They had a distribution challenge that the trucks that delivered the cookies to the grocery store were used to going down one aisle instead of the other aisle. So it's thinking through your distribution chain and where are you likely to have issues. Maybe you need to now deliver this to places that you don't currently deliver. Physical experience is both the physical experience internally and the physical experience of your customer. You can think through the customer's journey. What do they see, smell, hear, taste, touch? What do they feel? What are their emotions when they're interacting with your current product or service? And would delivering this new innovation, would it require you to introduce a physical experience that's very different than your current physical experience? That can cause problems. And then supporting all of this is people, which kind of alludes back to environment, but if you think about the types of people that you need in order to deliver on this innovation, who you hire, what their cultural norms are, how you organize them, right? What tasks they need to deliver. Are those people that are right for your innovation the same people that are already in your company, or do you have a gap there? So again, this is a checklist to go through each of these and think through where you might find value blockers so that you can either know they're going to come and be ready to deal with them, or maybe you can adjust your idea to remove them ahead of time.
Thank you for diving into that a little bit more. We've got time for about 2 more questions, so I have 2 picked out here quickly, but again, keep them coming in. We'll be addressing them in that follow-up blog post. The next one is, do you see any generational differences regarding innovation, like between baby boomers versus millennials?
I'm not an expert. But I will say that this there are 2 kind of characteristics that are said to be true about millennials that I think make them more effective internal innovators. And I think one is that they have the right risk profile, that they want to innovate, but they don't necessarily want to take on a big financial risk. They don't feel that they don't have as strong an appetite to bet the financial well-being of their family, right? But they also have intrinsic motivation, so they're less motivated. You know, again, I'm speaking a little bit, you know, not in my area of expertise, but this is what I've read and what I've experienced is they're less motivated for the paycheck or for the bonus. They're motivated by having a sense of purpose. And I think that makes them a naturally effective internal innovator. They have this intrinsic motivation to innovate. So I'm very bullish on millennials as being a driver of what we are becoming and how organizations will evolve.
And I think there's a lot more that, you know, we could even discuss on that topic too in an additional webinar. So we'll be stay tuned for that. So the last question I want to jump into is, you know, how long does it take to learn how to apply this kind of model?
I'm not 100%, let me go back here, I'm not 100% sure because we are only starting to apply this model. What we have been doing for the last 10 years is under this options one is we've been embedding this, and we know how to do that. What we're doing now is we're adding the stuff around it. So I think that to transform an entire organization, I think that there are some good examples of that. I think MasterCard has done a really good job. That took them 5 to 7 years to create a broad shift. We are doing this in smaller pockets like teams or groups or, you know, cohorts that learn the methodology and they create kind of communities that will support each other. So I'm giving you a really long answer, which ultimately means I don't know yet, but I'm looking forward to finding out.
Well, we look forward to finding out too. What we'll go ahead and do is start wrapping things up. Thank you, Kai-Han. There you go. There's his contact information for those of you who are on the call still. Well, I want to say thank you again to today's speaker, and thank you to everyone who attended for your time and attention. We do hope that you'll join us again for more webinars. Registration for these are available at gpstrategies.com under the Webinars tab. I wish everyone on the call a wonderful and productive rest of your week. Thank you very much.
Thank you.